I'm having a hard time stopping that. um, Welcome, greetings, welcome, or welcome back, or welcome forward, however that would work, to the School of Earth Astrology. The music you were just hearing is one of the, now 400 soul songs that I've created based on birth charts with my dear friend, master musician, master pianist Eric Deutsch, where I take charts and I translate them to a series of musical harmony notes and symbolic scenes and send those over to Eric, and he does magic. I should say that if you're listening to this now, many of you are here in present time, but some of you will be reviewing this at a time that I currently perceive to be the future. But anyway, if you're listening to this sometime between now and April 8th, 2024, the total solar eclipse, I'm currently running a discount on all of my offerings, all of readings, and that would also include soul songs. So if you're interested in getting a piano transmission of your natal chart, you can head over to geminibrett.com. And well, first of all, when you're there, if you're not on my newsletter, please sign up. But head over to astrology sessions and you can choose any of these things, including mentorship. And then at the checkout, use the coupon code Shadow Play. One word, Shadow Play, for the coming eclipse time. Just show you this other link here at the site. So geminibrett.com, moon songs. And that'll actually redirect you to Eric Deutsch's Bandcamp page, where you can stream all 13 of the new moon songs that we created for the year of 2022. It's a really fun project. When we do natal songs, they're like typically around 12 minutes long. For the moon songs, they were about 7 minutes long. And you can stream them for free, or you can pay just a little bit to download the thing. And if you do, you get to download also my production notes, which is, I don't know, I think it's like a 90-page document or something that shows like how I converted the charts into notes for Eric to create music from. As long as we're here at geminibrett.com, let me just also show you this events page. There will be upcoming an opportunity to be under the stars with me, which I would love to share stars with you in person. So if you're in California, especially if you're up here in the Bay Area or Sacramento, the lecture will be for Sacramento NCGR, the National Council of Geocosmic Research, on Sunday, March 24th, which is the day of the penumbral lunar eclipse coming up. It's actually not a lecture, it's a workshop. So we'll be doing live chart examples with folks on eclipses and eclipse cycles. And then we'll have a potluck dinner, and then we'll follow that with a night sky training, including watching the moon rise at sunset. I will also do, I don't have it configured here yet, I will, but I'll do an online eclipse and eclipse cycles training at the School of Earth Astrology on April 6th and April 7th, leading into the April 8th eclipse. I've decided not to travel, but rather to watch a partial solar eclipse from here in California where I live, although I definitely recommend going to see the eclipse from the path of totality if you can swing it. But anyway, so I decided to teach eclipses and eclipse cycles. It's one of my favorite things to do leading up into that eclipse. So there's not a link for it yet, but there will be soon. Just another reminder to please be on my mailing list, as I know most of you who are here live are. Oh, one more thing at the top of the events page, for those of you who are here live, if you didn't get this email from me today, please know that there's a different link for the community discussion that will follow this teaching. Right, so we're going to do a much shorter teaching than last week's Void of Course moon transmission, which, I hope you got the vibe if you were here that I really wanted to be in the void for some time before I got to the point. Like, we want to honor the technique. Actually, in the Dispositor tree, we'll have an opportunity to do a little something like that too, but it's going to be a much shorter transmission today. We'll follow it with, if there's some brave souls here live on Zoom, with some live chart examples, and then we'll shut it down and we will head over to a Zoom webinar where we can then all share our mics and cameras and wisdom, and you can teach me about how you use this technique, how this technique uses you, whatever. And so I really look forward to that. And so a lot of folks kind of got lost in space between the webinar and the meeting last week. So please just know at GeminiBrett.com, you can go to the events page. And the second thing, as soon as we shut down the webinar, I will open up this Zoom meeting for our community discussion. Soon, these transmissions and community discussions are going to move to a different space where I won't have to create two links like this. More on that down the road. All right, let's get back into these slides. I promised myself that I wasn't going to take the time to create slides for free teachings, but the truth is I tried to like draw dispositor trees on the Zoom whiteboard this morning and it just looked awful. So I was like, it's going to be easier for me to do some slides. So I've done that. I've created slides, I think, for 4 chart examples. But before we get into dispositor tree and dispositor tree chart examples, let's just talk about astrology in general, including why do I call my school the School of Earth Astrology? Well, this is not only like the school, but it's about my practice. And the idea is that first and foremost, of all these beautiful planets that we can engage with in the heavens, I would say especially the ones that we can see in the sky with our eyes, the beautiful Venuses and Jupiters, the Mars and Saturns, the Mercury when he chooses to show, that moon whose smile always delivers sunlight to Earth. Of all of these beautiful beings, these 7 planetus or wandering stars, to use the terms from the old Greek, I would suggest that there is one planet that is most important to you and me. And I would suggest that this is the planet that you chose, or perhaps she chose you. I don't really know how this works, but my friends, I am, of course, speaking about planet Earth. Yes. So anytime I go out to work the sky, I want to honor that this is about the marriage of heaven and earth. And I like to earth first. Even if the goal is to go take a beautiful picture like this. And I should say the goal is never to go take a beautiful picture. It's just something that I like to do, because I know how it is to live in a place where the sky is not open and clouds block our view. I will always say this, that if you wake up early to go see a Moon-Venus conjunction like this, even if they're hidden behind the clouds, just because you don't see them doesn't mean they don't see you. And they always appreciate the effort as far as I'm concerned. I shared this story yesterday, but just quickly I'll share it again. I don't have other pictures that I want to put up. You can see some of those on my YouTube page from yesterday, or at the Instagram or Facebook spaces. But before Moon and Venus were visible here, Mars was. And then by the time the moon rose, Mars was no longer visible. But I was looking for Mars, and it's really hard to see Mars right now because he's still generally close to the sun, and specifically like where in the zodiac they reside and how that sign rises in the northern hemisphere view. I just couldn't see Mars at all. But what I saw was this deer. And I'll tell you, I saw this deer after I went out, opened myself. I like to be on the ground. Then I like to work with Polaris, with North Star. We're very fortunate in the Northern Hemisphere at this time in our age of precession to have a star that marks the pole. So align my heart to the north, but then dig beneath the ground where the midnight sun lives at the IC, which in the Northern Hemisphere is north beneath the ground here. That's the roots. And I'll bring them to rise in the east. And then to reach in the south at the medium Chile, the MC, and then to rest here in the west as I come back to root again and go above to the particular and below to the whole, and then bring the energy into the heart. And then I feel like I'm connected in. And typically in that practice, I'll see something. And it might not be what I set out to see. And in this case, there was this particular star. And so when I couldn't find Mars, I went back to look at that star, and beneath that star, there was a deer. It's pretty close to me on the hills. Deers are very important to me, and I think probably to each of you. They remind us that we are earthlings, and bring us back to the forest and much more. But in many of the Mesoamerican calendrical systems, like the Mayan Solcan, I was born on a deer day. Deer is my Nawal. I was born 3 deer, 3 Manik, or 3 Kesh. So deer has always been a guide and teacher for me. And the deer was eating grass, looked at me, and then looked over here. And I took a picture of the deer. So the way I was zoomed in was just the right amount of zoom to then follow where the deer was looking and see Mars. And the reason why I wanted to share this story is it happens like this for me all the time. When I go out to engage with the planets in our sky, but start with the most important planet, Earth, first, right? Like when I do the school of Earth astrology, and the truth is, we are measuring our experience of Earth's experience of the heavenly happenings in astrology. Like when I go out and do that work, there's some Earth teacher, be it cricket, great blue heron, owl, coyote, human, crying baby in a stroller, usually in the middle of the night, that one's not around. Barking dog at some house down the hillside or something, something of Earth will often bring me into something with the sky that I wasn't seeing, or something in the sky will help me see something on Earth that I hadn't seen. So actually, I don't have an image of it here, but earlier Venus rose and just kind of shot off this hill, and then the moon came up, and right beneath Venus was this cow grazing. And I could just see the silhouette of a grazing cow. It was so beautiful. And, the sliver moon often has me thinking of Hathor, the house of Heru, the house of the sun, right? The great sacred cow whose milk gave us the Milky Way, according to some of the myths of many lands. She's had many names. And I really feel the moon's like exaltation in Taurus when I connect in that way. But yesterday, and I guess this will bring me to the point, or at least to the topic at hand, dispositorship and dispositor trees. Yesterday, Moon, Venus, and Mars, who are not in this frame that you're looking at on your screen, we're all in the sign of Aquarius. And the rules of the tradition, therefore, say they are traveling through the house of Saturn. Now, I want to be careful here for a few reasons. First of all, house, as we use that term in astrology today, describing what were once called the topos, or the places, right? Like this is how we divide the local sky, both above the ground, which we can see, and below, which of course we never can, yes? Back in the day, what we now call signs, like Aquarius, were called the houses. And I actually kind of appreciate that terminology a little bit more, especially for the topic at hand of dispositorship and dispositor tree, right? So the idea is, from the old school point of view, Aquarius is the house of Saturn. Now, to use the modern term of houses, or the old term of places, with Moon and Venus here rising, they're in the 12th house, and Saturn is said to rejoice in the 12th. So maybe we can talk about that another time. But the idea is, because Moon, Venus here shown, and also Mars and Pluto are currently traveling through Aquarius, from the tradition's point of view, these planets are kind of paying rent to Saturn. And Saturn's deal and his current condition and agreements and maybe disagreements will also therefore, in a sense, directly influence Moon, Venus, Mars, and Pluto, who are all traveling through his sign. Now, I'm going to just rewind this again and say, what does this have to do with Earth? And so I want to speak just briefly about my own trajectory in astrology. First of all, I didn't come to astrology till pretty late in life. I was, just about to turn 37 years old in 2012, when some trusted friends in a medicine circle encouraged me to have a reading with Daniel Gemario. then of the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, now of the Turning of the Ages Mystery School. And I mean, amazing, like 3 different people said the same thing in like the same week. And I was like, all right, so I got to do it. And it was really my first exposure to real astrology. I mean, beyond, all I had known before then was I was a Scorpio. And so reading Daniel's book, the Shamanic Astrology Handbook, which he wrote with Kaylin Castell, I then honored that, wow, I was born with a Gemini moon and Gemini rising. And especially with the way that paradigm or that tradition works with the moon and the ascendant as lineage and life intent, it was like, wow, that seems very important. Well, I have Venus in Virgo and Mars in Cancer and all these things. By the way, I am going to put my chart in the screen at the end of this jam, or somewhere in the middle, I should say. And so it just, you all caught the bug. It just spoke to me. It really said so much, and I just became an astrologer. And I will say that life circumstances basically arranged a path for me to start practicing, I mean, what some would call criminally early in my astrological study and practice. Really, I came back from some study and from the end of the beginning of the end of the beginning of the world again, December of 2012, where I was in Peru. And I was just trading my skills, my developing skills in this new craft of astrology with friends, other practitioners, body workers, acupuncturists, etc. And that felt clean. But then they were like, hey, what do you charge? This is great. I'm going to start sending you people. It's like, oh, geez, And I definitely did not pretend in any way to be a master. I very quickly developed the ability to say, I don't know, but I really appreciate the question. I want to learn how to do that. I had Daniel's book at my side when people would come over. I wasn't asking for much, But I wanted to mention this because, another thing about the school of Earth astrology, from a point of view where astrology is simply the rainbow bridge between astronomy, the measurable side of the heavenly happenings, and correspondences, the immeasurable side, between quantity and quality. The truth is that astronomical side of our craft has been with us always. Right? So I love to say that astrology is so much more than some symbolic language alone. Astrology is the poetic breath of nature. Now, this is part and parcel to my personal quest, which is that when we renature our astrology, we will remember the roots of the rules and the proofs of the astrological equations we use. And that's been my calling, to get outside, to be in the temple of the sky. And there's just so many, like that's why the 12th house is hidden things. It used to be, well, because those hills and trees like obscure my view of the horizon. And it's like, oh no, it's this. So the sun rises into the 12th, and when he does, to illuminate the earth, he hides the heavens. Like hours before this photo was taken, I was working with rising stars. I was actually making a video about how difficult that is when the sun is near the horizon, because the stars begin to disappear, yes? It's like, oh, hidden things. And then I really started understanding that the delineations of the places, which we now call houses, really have so much to do about the energy here on Earth when the sun moves through them. It's hard to connect that chord sometimes because, modern astrology, for example, tends to teach that the sun is the natural ruler of the 5th house, which I'm sure you've heard, right? Well, the sun transits through the 5th house every night. And I hate to speak it in clock time. It's really the 3rd and the 4th hours of the night. All right. But in clock time, on average, it's like 8 to 10 p.m. So why would the sun want nighttime? It just seems so absurd. And it really speaks of how far our craft has fallen from Earth, from an embodied earth-astrological experience of the heavenly happenings. When you look back to the tradition, planets rule signs. They actually didn't use that word, and we're going to get back to that anyway. Let's say that they're the landlords and ladies of the signs. But for the places, the houses, Planets aren't rulers of houses. Planets rejoice in the houses. And the joy of the sun is the ninth. And how much more sense does that make from an astrological, embodied, experiential experience of the heavens than the sun associated with the fifth? Because the sun in the fifth is nighttime, and the sun in the ninth is midday. The sun moves to the ninth in the moment when he finishes his daily climb. And how do you feel when you get to the mountaintop? And friends, that is sunburn hour, and it's siesta time in some cultures because it's just too dang hot to keep the doors of the stores open. And it's a beautifully spiritual time where we should sit and have that vision or daydream or maybe even have a pilgrimage. Yeah. So I just love that the tradition has this much more astronomical vision of the sun associated with the ninth versus this modern image of the sun associated with the fifth. Traditionally, it is Venus who's said to rejoice in the fifth. Well, if the sun, not Venus, but if the sun's transiting through the fifth every night between, on average, 8 and 10 p.m., think about how Venusian that time is, yes? So romance, passions, risk, creativity. Literally, in some of the traditions, taverns, games of chance, right? It's like 8 to 10 p.m. stuff, yeah? Anyway, this isn't meant to be a transmission on the planetary rejoicing or the association from the tradition of planets and those places, which we now call houses. It's meant to be a transmission about planets and the houses, which we now call signs, and the idea of dispositorship. But I just wanted to mention that because, again, my quest, and it's something that I love to share with you, hopefully not only in an information exchange, but in heart. My quest is to find the earthstronomical side of this thing, to connect as an earthling to the marriage of heaven and earth. And the truth is, it was plants that brought me to the planets. So I guess that's why I'm on this trip. Welcome to the jungle. All right. And these days I am on this trip of, hey, look at, here's an Aquarius moon and Venus in the 12th. And this is a sign, Aquarius, associated with Saturn. And it's a house, the 12th, associated with the joy of Saturn. And so how is this Saturnian? Now I should say, to honor the elders, I just poured a cup for Saturn, that my first teacher, Daniel Gemario, and then in his shamanic astrology paradigm, and at his current Turning of the Ages Mystery School, like they don't do what people call rulerships these days. And by the way, that rulership word doesn't go all the way back anyway, but regardless, like they don't do dispositorship, which you might know is rulership, okay? So if you hadn't heard that word before and you're like, what is this dispositor tree class about? I bet you that doesn't apply to any of you that are here live. But if you haven't, you probably have heard this word rulership, like the idea that, well, moon rules Cancer, right? So Daniel, he doesn't do that. His teacher, one of his many teachers, was Dane Rudhyar, and Rudhyar was really starting to leave that part of the tradition as well. And you know, from an earthstronomical point of view, why should I say that Saturn like rules this division of the sun's path? That moon and Venus were visiting at this time of the photograph yesterday morning. I mean, do I see that in the sky? And the answer is no. And I really wasn't so aware of it in my first year, I guess, in astrology, because I don't know, I was kind of taught to see that as just some kind of patriarchal rulership thing and something we should probably, you know, not fall prey to. I was taught a system that would suggest that this particular Moon-Venus conjunction of March 8th, 2024 was the root chakra gate of Inanna's descent into the underworld, and that means this whole thing. And by the way, I was out to connect with that. Well, I should say, I'll just say I was out to pray with that yesterday. I'm personally in a Venus return cycle, a topic for another time. It's a very important moment in that cycle. And I was working with Antares, who was setting when I was born, therefore the seventh house, kind of a relationship thing. I was working with Venus, who can be a general CEO of the relationship reality, if you will. Although, CEO just doesn't really feel too Venusian or lunar. But anyway, so I was out, for this moment, and I have this story of what it is. And I always warn myself when I'm heading out and remind students that if you really want to listen to the sky, don't go out there telling the planets what they are doing. So if I go out there and say, hey, this is the root chakra conjunction, or hey, this is an Aquarius Moon Venus conjunction, disposited by Saturn, then I'm telling instead of listening. And the more astrology you learn, the harder it is to listen to the sky rather than talking. As I've listened to the sky, maybe as I've talked to the sky in like a more detailed language, I have personally found that dispositorship seems to really speak. So here's an image for when that photograph was taken yesterday. And as I was saying, Venus, Moon, Mars, all in the sign of Aquarius at the time, which traditionally is associated with Saturn, right? And so what you've seen here is I've dimmed the invisible lights. We're only looking at the visible planets, and I'm going to do that in the transmission today, although certainly many modern astrologers will utilize the idea that Uranus rules the sign of Aquarius, and Neptune that of Pisces, and Pluto that of Scorpio, and in their dispositor tree work. I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to go with the tradition. The tradition says that Aquarius is the house of Saturn. And so the general idea is that Venus and Moon and Mars here in Aquarius, they're like they're hanging out in Saturn's house. Maybe they're subletting it for some time. Of course, the moon is just swimming through, like moon gets through a sign on average in like 2 1/3 days, right? But Venus will hang out for a while, Mars for a longer time, because Mars moves more slowly than Venus does, right? And Saturn's been in Pisces for a bit and will be there for a bit because Saturn moves much more slowly. But the general idea is that because they're in Aquarius, it's like they're paying rent to Saturn, right? And this goes back to an older term rather than ruler, which I really don't like personally. It does feel just crazy patriarchal. I like this older term, which was basically domicile lord. Now that sounds like too heavy. Domicile lady, domicile lord. But what do you feel when you hear the term landlord? And so this is why I like that old term, because most of us have had that experience, right? Like I've had landlords, I've had some great ones, I've had some not great ones. I've had landladies, you know what I mean? I've had people that I'm paying rent to and who might just drop in unannounced sometime. But I'm also in their house that they own, their investment, and they might be concerned about if I'm taking care of it or not. You know what I'm saying? So there's that interesting relationship. In astrology, it goes two ways, interestingly. Right? So Venus, Moon, and Mars here in Aquarius, they are said to be received by Saturn. Right? And that, he has to be a host for them. They're in his house. Whereas they are said to bestow energy to Saturn. So when we speak about dispositor trees, we're kind of speaking about like the energy exchange, like the economy of the chart in some interesting ways. And actually, I just appreciate when I started studying traditional astrology, which at first was with Gary Caton, he just said like this, look, Mercury, I just keep going to Mercury, fine. Here's Mercury in Pisces. He's got to pay rent to Jupiter. Jupiter's in Taurus. Jupiter's paying rent to Venus because Taurus is her house. Venus is in Aquarius. Venus, along with Moon and Mars, are paying rent to Saturn, right? So this interesting exchange. Now, I had become convinced to start looking at some of these old rules, even though, the idea that Saturn is the landlord of Aquarius, like it's not something I can see in the sky. And so is it Earth astrology is a really cool question. Well, when I was, I think my first experience of this, probably of being convinced to look at some of these things of the astrological code that do feel more symbolic rather than things I can point to in the sky. And by the way, I used to say astrology is not some symbolic language. Astrology is the poetic breath of nature. Now I say astrology is not some symbolic language alone. Astrology is the poetic breath of nature, because I use all sorts of symbolic techniques. I used to have to justify why a progression can work. It seems so weird that I would turn a day into a year, so that now I'm 48 and a half years old. I should be interested in that transit chart from when I was 48 and a half days old. In these days, it's just like, look, if it works, like I'm down. Though I really do love to teach the technique and the tradition, help people not just push computer buttons, and also help people like resist just taking things on faith or belief, right? So around here in the School of Astrology, it's always, let me show you a bunch of stuff. Sometimes I'll even show you stuff, as we do in astrology, that seems to contradict or maybe does. What works for you? What doesn't? How does it work for you? And then we want to connect in heart, right? And so that's why I'm out right now to start a community, like a group of fellow starry students like myself who want to receive some of this knowledge, but most importantly, who want to explore together, to research, and to bring the news of the flowers back to the hive, All right, so yeah, I remember being at the Norwalk Astrological Conference, which, by the way, I will be doing a pre-conference workshop at this year of 2024 and 2 lectures at. I'm very excited for that. It's the end of May. Dig it. It's also online, by the way, if you can't travel to Seattle. Anyway, I was at a Norwalk and I saw a lecture by Chris Brennan on annual profections, and I really love technique lectures, and I was like, wow, this thing works. And gosh, it works based upon this whole rulership situation. So what is that? And that was, I think, one of the first, I mean, it wasn't the first, but reflecting, it was kind of one of my first conscious experiences of a part of our craft that I can't see with my eyes. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist in nature. And I'm always looking for those keys. And at least from the Northern Hemisphere point of view, and only from the Northern Hemisphere point of view, there's something about Saturn being the dispositor of Capricorn and Aquarius, because of course these are the cold months of the year, right? So this brings me to the thema mundi, which it said was given to us by Hermes Trismegistus. This is where the domicile associations were first presented according to the mystery of our astrological history. That Cancer is the house of the moon, that Leo is the house of the sun, Virgo that of Mercury, Libra that of Venus, Scorpio that of Mars, Sagittarius that of Jupiter, Capricorn that of Saturn. And then there was this kind of finishing move, and those of you who have taken this class with me in the golden year of Earth astrology have seen this slide before, and you know why I like to put a Taurus rising chart, so we get this beautiful symmetry. And you get a nocturnal or lunar side and a diurnal or solar side. Now we use those terms nocturnal and diurnal in many ways, including nocturnal, the house is beneath the ground, diurnal above, nocturnal, the down and in signs, the earth and water signs, diurnal, the up and out signs, the air and fire signs, right? So I just want to be sensitive to that. But here, as you can see, though Capricorn, Saturn is not a diurnal sign, Capricorn, earth, right? Aquarius, Saturn is not a nocturnal sign. Yeah, air. That Capricorn is on the solar side, Aquarius on the lunar side. That Scorpio's on the solar side, Mars on the lunar side. I'm not going to get beyond that here. All right. Something has to do with aspect theory and such, right? But this is kind of from an old school point of view, a more complete picture of the domicile associations. And I'm sure you all know this, though many of you will have started or work in modern astrology, which is totally cool. I'm not going to do it today. But where instead of Saturn in Aquarius, you would show Uranus, and instead of Jupiter in Pisces, you would show Neptune, and instead of Mars in Scorpio, you would show Pluto. I mean, some systems actually put Pluto to substitute Mars in Aries, because then according to like planetary speed and distance from the sun, you're going Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto here, right? See how that works? But in this case, we're branching out according to planetary speed, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, both from the sun in one direction and from the moon in the other. It's like just a kind of a beautiful thing to know. And I love the symmetry in this ancient system that we lose when we take Aquarius away from Saturn, that when we take Pisces away from Jupiter, right? So I personally prefer this old system. And just say again, like on my own trajectory, I started in a very modern school. And then I found dispositorship through teachers of traditional astrology, through Gary Caton, through Chris Brennan. Ended up taking Chris Brennan's Hellenistic astrology course, which is a lot of information, but it's pretty cool. And I studied with Gary privately for some time, and it's really kind of changed the way I go about things. And I try to practice traditional and modern astrology, and traditional maybe philosophy with a modern heart. All right. So this is the map. And again, usually people these days show an Aries rising chart. Back in the day, they showed a Cancer rising chart, specifically 15 degrees Cancer rising. But I like when I show this to show this Taurus rising chart, because you get this balance. And then you can see Saturn, Saturn, Jupiter, Jupiter, Mars, Mars, in signs that are called like engirding. Like Aries and Scorpio were said to be like engirding signs because they're both associated with Mars, even though they're in conjunct. All right, so let's just transmit this through some chart examples. Last week in the Void of Course, Moon, and Translation of Light transmission, I shared this chart of Amelia Earhart because I literally had a dream of her the night before, and she's a pretty interesting example of translation of light. Now look at that moon, Pluto, right? And she lived dangerously. I don't know if that's a good description of like her general life, but she did fly solo flights across the Atlantic. I mean, she ended up disappearing, right, and was declared dead a couple years later because she was making a around the world flight with just her and somebody keeping the log and navigating. So it's not like I don't play with these invisible planets. I'm interested in asteroids and all sorts of things, but we can also see so much information here when we dim. Well, we don't even have to dim when we just take away the invisible things and work with the 7 traditional planetas, which means moving star, right? And that includes the luminaries, moon and sun, right? Who are seen traveling through the stars, moon much more so than the sun, who will blind our eyes when we try. But then, of course, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. And let me speak it this way: moon, Mercury, Venus, sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, according to the planetary speed, generally speaking, right? As we spoke about last week in translation of light. So the idea just quickly of translation of light is the moon will bring the energy of her previous aspect, or her, I like to say previous conversation, to that of her next. So here, this moon at 1123 Gemini, before and shortly before Amelia Earhart's birth, squared Mars, and then squared Saturn. And then squared Jupiter, right? So in that very brief moment, she translated the light of Mars to Jupiter, and now Amelia Earhart born after the moon-Jupiter square and before the moon-Mercury sextile. So she's born at a time where the moon is said to be translating the light of Jupiter to Mercury, right? I mean, that Mars-Jupiter feels like this big danger and big adventure in that, right? And then think about the Gemini moon, which can be very bright, like bringing that to Mercury, right? Mercury's in Leo. And, Mercury's also combust. He's hidden behind the sun. He's not, technically speaking, not combust, where typically a degree range of 8.5 degrees on either side of the sun is spoken of combustion. Like that's the red fire bit of the sky that rises before the sun and sets after the sun. But Mercury here is technically under the beams of the sun, which from the Hellenistic point of view is a range of sky that stretches 15 degrees on the other side of either side of the sun. So you get a sign's worth of sky with the sun in the middle, right? And the idea is that when planets are within that range, the sun is just too bright, so we can't see them anymore. By the way, 15 degrees is not a good rule for Venus, but it's a great rule for Mercury. With Mercury, sometimes we can even go 17, very much depending on the sign and where on Earth you're looking from. This is definitely Mercury. Very difficult to see. There might be some places on Earth where this is Mercury visible as an evening star, but probably Mercury's still on this great adventure behind the sun, literally from Earth's point of view, where Mercury disappears for, a month or two every 4 months. And so Amelia Earhart disappeared. All right, well, to get to this idea of dispositor tree, Mercury's in Leo, right? So while in the tradition there is said to be some difficulty with the planet's disappearance into the flames of the sun, right? Words really, I hope, will invoke a reminder of the importance, at least in ancient traditionally and for any modern Earth astrologer too, of planetary visibility. We want to connect with them and speak with them visibly, right? Which is why I want to actually start in today's stay with visible planets here, okay? So Mercury is said in some ways to be challenged because we can't see Mercury when this close to the sun, but from a different point of view, is said to be benefit from cohabiting with the sun in Leo. Right? I mean, and look, if you're in the house with the landlord, that could go either way, right? It might be, that's really nice because they're going to take care of me. They have to receive me. And here I am to ask questions and they're cooking dinner or whatever. It can be really tricky. And in that sense, it kind of depends on the planets involved and all sorts of other things according to the tradition. Like here, because Mercury's set after the sun, Mercury's an evening star and therefore belongs to the night sect. The time of Amelia Earhart's birth, according to the old symbolic rules or maybe natural rules of our craft. And so maybe it's not as good of a blend as you would want, and who's to say, right? But this brings us to this dispositor tree for Amelia Earhart, where she has a final dispositor. Because the sun is at home in the sign of Leo. And so the sun is at the top of the tree. But let's go to the bottom of the tree. Let's start with Saturn. Saturn in Scorpio, which I know many modern astrologers would associate with Pluto, right? But traditionally that's Mars. So Saturn is traveling in Mars's house called Scorpio. And therefore Saturn's got to pay that rent to the Mars. And Saturn, interestingly, from an old school point of view, it goes both ways. Like Saturn's kind of experience in Scorpio will depend on how Mars is experiencing Virgo. And this will give me the opportunity to shift from this kind of domicile lord or ruler point of view. I saw some of you here in chat offered words like guardian. Isabel, I don't know if you heard her, but she just barked outside as soon as I said guardian. It's like, that's how that word makes me feel, though I do appreciate the kind of custody and adopted parent vibe of that word as well. I prefer guide. It's like Saturn's learning Scorpio here and helping Amelia Earhart learn Scorpio so she can do what she came to do. Which actually, from my point of view with Aries rising, you'll see no nodes on this image, right? So it's like, what would an evolutionary astrologer do, right? But I like to say what was rising when you rose is rising with you. I prefer the tradition of the craft that honors for the Aries rising being that they are a child of Mars. Now with Mars in the 6th, a house that's said to be blind to the ascendant, along with the 12th, 8th, and the 2nd, some in the medieval tradition would look for an alternative, a substitute. And Another one would be Jupiter. Anyway, let's not play that game right now. I prefer to just stick with the planet who's said to be the domicile lord of the ascendant as the steersman of the chart. An old school word for the ascendant is the rudder. So with Aries rising, Mars is the steersman of the chart, right? Kind of a different technique. And a cool thing about dispositor trees is we really don't have to know the ascendant, but if you want to understand something about Mars's condition in the chart, we also have to understand something about Mars in the sixth, which amazingly, actually from an old school astrology point of view, Mars is dignified for this reason because Mars is said to rejoice in the sixth. All right, but here's Mars in Virgo, Saturn's in Scorpio. You know, so interestingly, Saturn in Scorpio with Aries rising, maybe there's something about having some boundaries around dangerous experiences above the ocean. Amelia Earhart maybe didn't listen completely to that one. I'm sure part of her experience of just dealing with a very patriarchal world of, like adventurous dudes in planes and pioneers, and she had to step in. Like I think she's a very beautiful. We just had National Women's Day yesterday, right? Just silly that would be a day long. That's a every day. But Amelia Earhart is a great heroine, pioneer in that world. I very much respect her in this way. So I can't spend forever in this chart. We have a few more to do, and I'm really interested in getting to some live chart examples and to get into the community discussion. I always think I can get through these things fast, but I want to share it for real. I want to go deep with you. All right, anyway. So Saturn's in Scorpio, right? Like he's traveling through, he's learning a language, let's say that, a tradition, Scorpio, a magic, that from an old school point of view is best known by Mars. So we might think of Mars as Saturn's teacher. I just like to say Mars as guide. In the signs Scorpio, where Saturn resides, and Virgo, where Mars resides at the time of Amelia Earhart's entrance, these signs are sextile. The harmonic astrologer in me really wants to explore the truth that they're 64 degrees apart, but that's a tale for another time. Sorry, 74 degrees apart. But they're in signs that traditionally can see one another. So there's reception, Saturn's in Mars's world, and the phone line is open to the guide. Hey, what the heck is this place? What do I do about this? And Mars can send teachings, but Mars is doing that while he himself, or she herself, or they themselves, or however you want to say it. I typically project he onto Mars. It's just a way that I can connect with Mars. Like personally, I kind of have to project how I experience this world onto the planets to try to meet them in my own personal, call it juvenile or immature, whatever you want, like quest to connect with these greater beings. Anyway, here's Mars in Virgo, and he's with Jupiter. He's got a whole thing going down. And so as Saturn's asking to learn Scorpio, he might be getting a more like Virgo teaching of how to Scorpio, which sometimes can be very helpful and sometimes probably not. Because I feel personally that Scorpio is the art of the heart, just ripping it open and the big feels. And sometimes it's better not to try to categorize and classify and, go mentally at that, but just have your experience, yes? Now, Mars and Jupiter alike are in Virgo, right? And so this is Mercury's sign, and they don't have a phone line to their teacher. If we use traditional aspect theory, right? Neighboring signs are called inconjuncts. Now, I know modern astrology tends to reserve that term for the quincunx alone, the 150 degree, right? But traditionally, this idea of inconjunct from every sign, there's 4 of them. The neighbors of the opposition or the partner, right? Which are the 2 quincunxes. So from Virgo, the opposition is Pisces. So we're talking about Virgo not able to see the neighbors of Pisces, Aquarius, and Aries. But we also say from an old school point of view, that Virgo cannot see its own neighbors, Leo to one side and Libra to the other, yes? So there's something kind of strange about Mars and Jupiter gathered here, like committed to learning how to Virgo and not having the ability to speak with Mercury. So that can be a piece of it. Now, some astrologies say that the idea of reception does not demand an aspect. Most disagree in the traditions of many lands, but it's an interesting thing to consider. And what I will say is so important here to kind of retrograde back to the teachings of last week is that though Mercury and Jupiter are in conjunct, and so Jupiter's learning Virgo and kind of disconnected from his guide, and so he's just got to figure it out, and he's got Mars at his side. It's a whole thing. That moon is translating the light of Jupiter to Mercury, and therefore can kind of serve as a third party who can speak for the two. It's like, well, the phone line between Jupiter and Mercury's dead, but Jupiter can call the moon and moon can call Mercury and then kind of like relay messages, at least for time. Do you see? Okay, so the dispositor tree here, we find kind of Mercury collecting some rent because we have both Mars and Jupiter in his world of Virgo. We also have Moon and Venus in his other home called Gemini. So all the rents go into Mercury, but not so fast because Mercury, of course, is living in the sun sign. And whether cohabiting or not, it kind of looks like he's renting a room. And it looks like a pretty opulent room in Leo because it kind of seems to me like he's taken all this rent that he's receiving from Moon, Venus, Mars, and Jupiter. Maybe this even includes the rent that Mars himself gets from Saturn. And it's all going up to the sun. You see what I'm saying? So that's what it is to have a final dispositor, like a planet in its own sign in a chart. It kind of gets to collect its all the rent, right? Through this kind of system of ecology or economy or whatever. Now, that metaphor can be ridiculous, but it might also be helpful for you. And I'm looking forward to our community discussion after this transmission and to some live chart examples in between where we can see how maybe this is experienced or works for you. All right, well, let's move on here. You know, we could be in one chart forever. I've been spending a lot of time tripping on Frank Herbert, who is the author of Dune and the Dune books. Which Dune changed my life when I was young, that book. And later the film, which I found interesting as I was going through a David Lynch period anyway. I think I misspoke about Frank Herbert. I don't know if it was last week or one of my weekly Wednesdays, where I said he was a professor at the University of Washington. This is not true. He was a student there and he didn't finish. His son, Brian, was like, he only wanted to take classes that he was excited about, and he ran out of them. And so he left school and took a job as a journalist. And then, interestingly, you know, let's keep other planets here on the chart as I just described this. His wife was the breadwinner for a time with their young kids as he was starting to write the Dune books near the dunes of southern Oregon. Anyway, so I've been in his chart a bunch recently because I saw that the Dune 2, the new movie by Denis Villeneuve, which was, as far as I'm concerned, amazing. It did depart from some very important story arcs in the book, but I kind of felt like they were cool, especially for a film and especially in like our current day. But the movie, it just sounded big. I'm like, I'm gonna go see it in IMAX too. It was just an experience. And if you can handle violence and stuff, and if you can't, don't go. It's brutal. You know, there's like religious war happening and all so much like control and power and manipulation and politics and right. Like this book really like woke me up to so much of how this world works in ways that I wish it didn't and probably shouldn't and hopefully won't, you know. But anyway, like a lot of that was like very beautifully portrayed on the big screen in this Dune 2. And if it does well and it's doing very well, then there's some potential, or let's use the classical astrology term promise, that Denis will make Dune 3 sometime down the road, which will be based on this pretty heavy book, Dune Messiah. the second book in Frank Herbert's series. And that doesn't happen until 12 years after Dune. And so it sounds like to me, whether he does it or not, if he does it, it's not gonna happen for some time. I was just tripping yesterday on how like, oh man, I wish Koa, who's 8 now, he's about to turn 9, was like old enough for me to share this with, but I don't want to like take him to Dune. I was like, you know what, the next one comes out, it'll probably be 15 or 16. Like, I bet you we're gonna do that together. And I'm kind of excited about that. All right. Anyway, one thing I was looking at, because I was talking about void of course and translation of light last week, is like, what is that picture in Frank Herbert's chart? All right. Now, I want to just, while we're here, just mention that, look, I love outer planets. I like to say that the invisible planets speak to us and through us via their connections to visible planets. So he has like strong Neptune. Why? Sun sextile Neptune. Even more so, Venus square Neptune. Why even more so? Because while Sun is sextile Neptune, Sun is separating from Neptune. Now the geometry is tighter between them than between Venus and Neptune. But Venus is squaring Neptune, which tends to be a aspect that can speak more, can kind of bring in complex even. And Venus, who moves faster than Neptune, is applying to Neptune. But I don't know, the sun's in the 12th, which of course modern astrology associates with Neptune anyway. Some classical astrologers, Vedic astrologers as well, who often utilize whole sign charts, would see that sun in the first. Many ways to bet the cosmic cat. But regardless, like there are strong connections with Neptune here, and there should be. Dude was a fantasy writer. He created worlds. Do you know what I mean? And in, at least in Dune, like this religion, which can be a Neptunian thing, can be a Jupiterian thing from the old school point of view. So we should look to that too. Anyway, look at also Mercury, who moves quickly, will square Neptune not too long after Frank Herbert's birth. Before then, he will trine Pluto so after Frank Herbert's birth, I meant to say before Mercury will square Neptune. After Frank Herbert's birth, Mercury will trine Pluto, right? Before Frank Herbert's birth, Mercury trined Uranus. I mean, look at Mercury there is basically at a midpoint with the North Node of Uranus and Pluto, right? I mean, and it's like really telling if you know at least this book, not that Dune and the Dune series were the only things that he wrote. All right, I'm going to dim the invisibles here and look at the lights that we can see with our eyes. And in fact, they were all far enough from the sun at the time of Frank Herbert's birth to be seen. You see Sun in Libra here. And the sun, because he's said to be exalted in Aries, is said to be in fall in Libra. Now, last week, but I want to mention it again, especially with this chart where we see Venus in Scorpio, where Venus, to use the medieval term, is said to be exiled because she's all the way on the other side of the world from her Taurus home. Jupiter is said to be in exile because he's all the way on the opposite side of the world from his Pisces home, right? Like, I don't see those as weak planets. I see them personally as kind of counterculture. When Amelia Earhart has the sun in Leo, the sun's in Leo, the sun's at home, there's a strength there, and there's an ability for the sun to just kind of express itself the way we would expect the sun to. It's kind of like, you know, casting an actor to play a role that's just a natural fit for that actor or actress, you know? Jupiter is not the one you would typically cast to play Virgo. Mercury is the ideal actor or actress for that sign. Do you feel me? Like, that's how I work with these old rules. So I look at when we have planets in so-called exile, like Scorpio Venus or Virgo Jupiter, I look at them as planets that are configured to more of a counterculture expression. Sun in Libra. Right, and interestingly, here we are in, I guess, the 60s and maybe the 50s even, in Frank Herbert's in a marriage where the wife is the breadwinner. And I'm not trying to judge that in any way, but of course that was kind of out of the cultural context of the time. Yeah? Fair to say? All right, well, let's talk about translation of light. So Moon has just recently, before Frank Herbert's entrance, Moon has entered Virgo. And so she has not yet made an aspect in Virgo. Let's go back here and we can actually see that, well, no, Moon is exactly opposite Uranus. And so if we do use modern planets in traditional or translation of light, then the Moon is actually carrying that Uranus opposition to Mercury. I mean, feels pretty good for a sci-fi writer, especially like one who created like a whole technical religion of control in this book Dune. You can kind of feel that Virgo Moon Uranus thing in that, and then Moon's carrying it to Mercury, who's in Scorpio. It's like this powerful languaging, writing this book that changed some people's lives. It would become movies that might offer similar experiences for folks. You see what I'm saying? So again, I'm not like saying that the outer planets aren't real. I think we should very much participate with them. But in this technique, I want to also look at this with only the visible planets. So as I shared last week, like the void of course, the way that modern astrology works with the void of course is actually, in a sense, stricter than how it was in the tradition, where in some versions, the Moon could travel 13 degrees without dropping the light, including across sign cusps. And in some traditions, 30 degrees. And if the Moon can go 30 degrees between old school Ptolemaic traditional aspects, the opposition, the two trines, the two squares, the two sextiles in conjunction, if she can go 30 degrees between traditional aspects with visible planets before going void, it's a very rare thing. So here, Moon, if we honor that Moon can like carry the light of a previous aspect across a sign cusp, then her previous aspect before Frank Herbert's birth, when in the sign of Leo, was a trine with Mars in Sagittarius. And she's now in Virgo and carrying that Leo Moon trine Sagittarius Mars to a Virgo Moon sextile Scorpio Mercury. And that can very much work for at least the way that I best know Frank Herbert, or the only way I do, which is I don't know him at all, but I know this book pretty well, at least my view of it, and many others, because I'm very interested in the Duneverse. Anyway, so what about Moon transiting Sagittarius Mars to Scorpio Mercury? Can you feel like a powerful transmission of religious cult in that too, and like sci-fi adventures of faraway worlds? And if you know something about Dune, there's a water world, you can feel the Scorpio. There's a desert world, maybe you can feel the Sagittarius. There's definitely religion, there's religious war, like you can feel a lot of that in this chart. All right, and so maybe we'll stop talking about void of course and translation of light there, just bring it to another level. Okay, Frank Herbert does not have a final dispositor. Yes, Mercury and Venus and Scorpio, they're in Mars's sign. Mars is in Sagittarius, he's in Jupiter's sign, who along with the Moon and Saturn in Virgo, they're in Mercury's sign. Sun's in Libra and Venus's sign, right? So when we look at this dispositor tree, you don't get some planet on top like Amelia Earhart had that Leo sun. You actually get this triple thing at the top, which is intriguing. And, just as we could say Moon is translating the light of Sagittarius Mars to Scorpio Mercury, the dispositor tree shows a kind of similar story. So let's start with the sun. The sun's in Libra. He's paying rent to Venus. Venus is in Scorpio. She's paying rent to Mars. She's not alone in Scorpio, but in this particular case, you don't see Mercury next to Venus on the dispositor tree because we have this triple exchange going on. Let's first, before we return to that, just say here's Moon and Jupiter in Virgo paying rent to Mercury, and Moon and Saturn in Virgo, right? Paying rent to Mercury, or trying to learn and be guided by Mercury. Well, so is Jupiter. But Jupiter's not down here because we have this whole kind of triple exchange program going on. And think about this. This is like, there's a brilliant thing there. Like, if I wanted to trade you astrology teachings for, what do you do? What's your medicine, right? Let's say you're a craniosacral practitioner and I love that modality and you live down the street. Hey, can I trade you astrology or like night sky stuff for cranial? You're like, yeah, I love that stuff, but I don't like how you teach it. And you might be nice enough to not say it that way. You're like, yeah, I'm not really interested in that trade right now. But I have a friend who would love to study astrology with you, and they're growing tons of kale that I want, and so they give me the kale, I give you the cranio, you give her the astrology, and we're cool, right? That's kind of like this type of economy, right? Where Mars in Sagittarius is paying the rent to Jupiter, to use that term. Jupiter's in Virgo, he's paying the rent to Mercury. Mercury's in Scorpio, he's giving that rent back to Mars, right? And they're just in this kind of triple exchange system, right? Well, Mercury's being fed by Moon and Saturn. Mars is being fed by Venus, who herself is being fed by the Sun. I mean, and so in some regards, maybe you would see them in this tradition or this technique's point of view as like dominant planets, where Jupiter's just kind of like on his own, but he's not. He's hanging out with the Moon and Saturn, But anyway, hopefully you're getting how this thing works if you haven't seen it before. And again, well, I can kind of feel at least the book Dune in a lot of this. Sun in Libra, like, I don't want to do too many spoilers, but let me just say that there is in that it speaks about royal houses, and to use old terms like emperors, there's dukes and barons and stuff, and there's like like political marriages, instead of just marriages for like passion and love, and I can kind of feel some of that Libra Sun there going to Venus, and that can invoke some of, I wish I was in a passionate marriage, or some of the jealousy themes that can result in the like, but feeding up to Mars, who's in Virgo, like if Scorpio speaks about power and there's some dependent upon Mars and what Mars is up to explore, like, what kind of power will this look to? What kind of magic will this look to? Well, Mars is in Sagittarius, so the power of exploration, adventure, the power of religiosity can be in that. Do you see what I'm saying? But Mars is in Sagittarius, so is it going to be more towards adventure or what? Now that's going to have to do with some of his agreements, his aspects or disagreements, lack thereof in the chart. Many things like, is he in the second house or the third whole sign, on and on and on. But look, Mars is in Sagittarius. So if I was looking at, is that exploration or is it kind of religiosity, which in a sense is junior varsity astrology, but sometimes that's the best stuff, Well, where's Jupiter? Because Mars is living in Jupiter's sign, he's in Virgo. Oh yeah, so it's some kind of religious thing, and probably kind of a weird religion thing, and something about control and religion on a faraway land that was seeded by a manipulative priestesshood, which is part of the tale. There's a breeding program in on it, and so maybe the moon here, and again, I don't want to like spoil the book or the films for you, so let me just leave that there. And let's go to another example that we looked at last week too, of a strange religion. Robert Nesta Marley, born with Sagittarius rising, a child of Jupiter, which at least the way that I know Marley truly speaks. Marley with Jupiter in the 10th in Virgo. One of the things was the reputation, the 10th, of a strange religion. Why would I call it that? Because Jupiter can have religious connotation, and Jupiter here is far from home. I'm just realizing that I'm showing this kind of, I'm not showing outer planets here, which I wish were on this chart. I'm showing instead kind of my old school settings where we get the visible planets, the lunar nodes, and the so-called special lots or parts of the moon. Anyway, let me just go ahead and we'll dim this to only, or brighten this to only the visible planets. And in this case, from a modern point of view, just a little bit of review, the moon would be void of course, right? So she's in Scorpio, where she's said to be exiled, or at least, let's say, in fall, to use that term because the moon is said to be exalted on the opposite side in Taurus, yes. But here the moon is in Scorpio, so said to be in fall. The moon is also void from a modern astrology point of view because she has made her last aspect to a visible planet, at least during her course through Scorpio, right? Which was very shortly before Bob Marley's birth, and that was that Scorpio moon sextile Virgo Jupiter, right? If we allow ourselves to open sign cusps to the void of course or translation of light tradition, moon is not void. It won't be long after Bob Marley's birth when she jumps into Sagittarius, and as soon as she gets there, she's going to sextile that Aquarius Mercury. So Scorpio moon, there's this emotional passion, this power in the soul, right? Bringing Virgo or Jupiter, right? And I'm just going to call that strange religion. That's trite, but let's use that for now. To Aquarius Mercury, like a voice of a revolutionary, it's like it is so Bob Marley. And I feel that translation of light is there. By the way, shortly after Sagittarius moon sextiles Aquarius Mercury, she will then trine Aries Venus, where Venus is said to be in exile. It's a really good image here where planets in their so-called detriment or exile. I prefer the term exile. I think it speaks more to how we experience life, which by the way would include what? Virgo Jupiter, Aries Venus, Aquarius Sun, Cancer Saturn, right? And then we have Scorpio moon in fall. Like, did Bob Marley not have fame? Not that it's not only about fame, right? No, Bob Marley died very young. He died at 36 years old. He was shot well before then. It was an assassination attempt, and it's not like everything was easy for Bob Marley. His youth was very difficult. He was the stone that the builder refused, to use a lyric of his. And I don't want to go too deep into each of these charts. But it's interesting, like if we say that moon translating Jupiter to Mercury speaks of like this revolutionary voice of like a strange religion and how that can change the world, including like one love, and then brings it to Venus. Well, some of that could maybe show you how he got into some kind of strange counterculture relational experiences through the fame that he found through speaking passionately this big Jupiter. All right, let me leave that there and we'll go and look at this from a different perspective in a dispositor tree. And like Frank Herbert, Bob Marley does not have a final dispositor. He does not have a planet in its own sign, but he does get this kind of triple exchange at the top. Let's here start with Jupiter in Virgo, paying rent to Mercury, who's in Aquarius, along with the sun. They're paying their rent to Saturn. Saturn in Cancer, paying the rent to the moon, who gives it to Mars, because moon's in Scorpio, and then Mars is in Capricorn, where Mars, by the way, is said to be exalted. And you can certainly feel that in Bob Marley. But Capricorn, like his guide is Saturn, so he gives it to Saturn. And by the way, here's an interesting play of just dispositorship in general. The idea is like, yes, according to the tradition, whether you choose to honor this approach or not, and to each their own, Mars is said to be exalted in Capricorn. Many call it like the general, like it was once the Whalers and then it became Bob Marley and the Whalers. And that's part of it. Mars is strong, trine to the midheaven, and I could go on and on. But what drove him to that? How did he operate in that world? Some of those questions might ask us to look at Cancer, Saturn, right? Because Mars is in Capricorn. He's studying Capricorn. Saturn's the guide of that world. Well, Saturn's in Cancer. There's an exile there. I mean, Bob Marley's father was this white dude who visited Jamaica and then he left. But he did it many times. He had many Jamaican kids, and many of them were white kids. And those were ones that held his name and his money and his title, Bob did not. He was the stone that the builder refused. He accurately predicted that he was the Marley the world would remember. But when he went to meet his white brothers and sisters in Jamaica, they just turned him away. And he was very much bullied, abused, etc., growing up for being of mixed race. So there's something about this fatherlessness that probably drove Marley to become Tough Gong, as he called himself, right? A rude boy, a gangster, but that also led to that general energy that led to his career, you know? But then his fame and his career also led to experiences of him being a father who wasn't quite there, and some really weird relational experiences. Bob Marley had 3 children with Rita. I thought it was 5, but like I was looking at, speaking of trees, you know, if you want to get to a really difficult one to trace, look at Bob Marley's family tree. Not only above him, but like beneath him, kids and grandkids. He had 3 sons, none of them twins, within the span of like 1 month. So one was his 3rd child with Rita, that was Stephen Marley. And then 2 different sons with 2 different women at the same time, because his fame also, and maybe it wouldn't have just required fame, but led to a lot of extramarital experiences. Anyway, I thought he and Rita had 5 kids, and some of the sites I'm looking at suggest that, but Rita had a child, Sharon, before they were married. I think Sharon was 6 months old when they got together, and Bob adopted Sharon, so she became Sharon Marley. But he also like demanded that Rita end any connection to her previous boyfriend, who was Sharon's father. So Sharon never knew her biological father. Like that was the conditions of the adoption, you know? And you can feel this kind of like patriarchal, I don't know. What do you think of that? His 5th child with Rita, who was Stephanie, actually was not his child either. Stephanie was born of another man while Rita and Marley were married. Now, Bob had 7, some say 8 children by 7 or 8 different women outside of his marriage with Rita. But Rita, and I just learned this morning, also had another child outside of her marriage with Bob during their union, who Bob Marley also adopted as Stephanie Marley. Probably, I don't know, like demanded that she also not know her biological father, who, by the way, like Rita had a relationship with also after Bob died. They had another child who was this professional soccer player. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his name right now. James Stewart, maybe. They had another child 11 years after Stephanie was born. So anyway, it's like a whole thing. And I'm seeing Kat says seems very in line with the male-dominated Jamaica of the time. Yeah, and I mean, Bob was very public about this, and it was kind of heavy. And you know, it's amazing like how many kids and grandkids he has. So many are musicians. I think personally, my favorite of them currently is Damian Marley, who was Bob's son by Cindy, what's her name, Breakworth or whatever, who was Miss World, one of his very public extramarital relationships during his go with Rita. All right, well, let's look at Rita's thing. But I just want you, you know, to kind of add this approach to a chart. And I'm looking forward to different ways we could language it, but I'm kind of looking at it as energy exchange, but also kind of like the biosphere, like the economy of a chart. All right, so let's go to Casey writes here, Fela Kuti would be interesting to look at too, agreed. So here's Rita Marley's chart. Now, we don't have a birth time for Rita, but she was born in Cuba. She moved to Jamaica when she was 3 months old. She was born in Cuba on July 25th, 1946. So I just cast a 12 p.m. chart here, but I also put it on a 0 Aries wheel to kind of make it global houseless, right? So don't look at this as a third house moon in any way. All right. But again, like a nice thing about dispositorship, and I'm going to dim this to the visible planets, and we want to get after this one. I'll do one more quick chart example, and then we'll go to some live chart examples. The one in between will be a hybrid. Anyway, nice thing about dispositorship and dispositor tree is, wow, we certainly want to know if we have this information at hand, the condition of the planets which will also speak to where they are in the houses. The cool thing about dispositor tree techniques is that, like, we don't need a birth time. So Rita Marley, like Amelia Earhart, interestingly, Mercury and the Sun both in the sign of Leo. Amelia Earhart was born with Mercury direct, Rita with Mercury retrograde. So here Mercury is now disappearing as an evening star, diving into the beams of the sun, but cohabiting with the sun, and therefore paying rent for that room in the sun's beautiful Leo mansion or whatever it is, you know. Well, how did Rita pay rent? And All right, so let's do this. Let's go from the bottom. So I'm looking at Jupiter in Libra, right? So paying rent to Venus. Well, Venus is in Virgo. Along with Mars, they're both paying rent to Mercury. But Mercury's in Leo, he gives it up to the sun. She has this final dispositor and only one. Saturn in Cancer. So the rents go into the moon, right? The phone line is dead. They're in inconjunct signs, which you'll see actually if you explore this way is also a theme here in Rita's chart. The Jupiter is in Libra, inconjunct Venus in Virgo. Venus in Virgo, Mars in Virgo, inconjunct their guide, Mercury, who's in Leo. Now Mercury is with the sun, so not an inconjunct, they're cohabiting, to use the old term. Saturn in Cancer, inconjunct the moon in Gemini. And moon in Gemini, though she's separating, does have a view of Mercury. Now Rita, I imagine you know, is also a successful singer. She was actually one of the I3s, which were the backup singers in the Wailers, Bob Marley and the Wailers. She was a singer when she met Bob Marley. She had a group called the Soulettes in Jamaica. She's had a singing career after Marley. And the next bits I want to say kind of by looking at another version of her chart. Because while it is true that dispositor trees don't necessitate our knowledge of the birth time, they do if on the birthday that we have on record, one of the planets changes signs or more than one. And this is true for Rita Marley. So let me just show you that we're looking at the moon here, 23.5 tropical Gemini, separating from a square to Mars and void from a modern point of view, or translating that light to Venus. If you let the moon travel 30 degrees without dropping the light to, again, retrograde to the conversation last week. If you weren't here for the long void of course and translation of light class that I offered last week, you can find it at my YouTube page, geminibrett.com/YouTube will get you to all of my live streams there. All right. So notice that, I cast this chart for 12 p.m. Well, shortly before 11 p.m., the moon ingressed Cancer. So now we have a different chart, especially when it comes to dispositorship. We actually now have two final dispositors. Moon at home in Cancer, Sun at home in Leo. Now there's some feels that this might be a better representative of Rita's birth time. I wonder, right? And so we can also use this as one of the many techniques to at least archetypally consider birth time rectification, figuring out a birth time when we don't know a birth time, right? I certainly would not stop there. I'm going to use a lot of timing techniques. But it's interesting that Rita in some ways carried this burden of Marley's many extramarital affairs. When you hear her speak about it, she speaks about that she was committed to him. She had a responsibility to him, to the movement. In many ways, she believed that what he was here on earth. I mean, you can feel this Cancer Saturn, which is in both of their charts. Maybe you can feel the proximity of Sun and Saturn more so in Rita's chart than in Bob's. But the moon in Cancer cohabiting with Saturn, you kind of feel that there. I mean, it's a thing that I would certainly consider. Now, also Gemini moon, and she's a singer, you know. But Leo Mercury, I mean, there's so many ways to pet the cosmic cat, and I don't want to turn this into a Rita Marley rectification class. But you can also see this image, right? So let's just go with these two different versions. A Gemini moon, where her dispositor tree would look like this. Saturn pays rent to the moon because he lives in her house called Cancer, but then the moon gives that to Mercury because she lives in his home, Gemini, and Mercury, of course, to the sun. Or is it that she's born late night? Nighttime is the right time. At the nocturnal hour, moon time, and then Saturn in Cancer is giving that rent to the moon, and she's at home. But then has to take care of Saturn, teach him out of Cancer, which is not said to not be Saturn's forte. And she seems in some ways to have lived this. It wasn't just with Bob's weird family tree and these many children he had with different women. And let's remember that Rita also during their marriage had a child with another man that Bob Marley later, like her first kid, adopted, right? But also her parents, like she speaks of how, I think it was her aunt basically raised her and how that was a hardship. And also them as parents, they were on tour, right? So eventually they have 5 kids at home. And, they were not raised by their parents. And you can feel some of the kind of familiar hardship that can be invoked when Saturn's in the sign of Cancer. We need to be careful there because Saturn will spend 2 to 3 years in Cancer every 29 and a half years. And so it really kind of depends on the connections. But I'm interested in this version of Rita's dispositor tree. And it also offers us the example where we get 2 planets at the top. You don't see arrows between them, right? Because the moon's the queen of Cancer, the sun's the king of Leo, to use those terms, right? So we just get 2 planets at the top receiving a bunch of rent from the planets that are in their houses, right? And Mercury's getting all this rent, but he's giving it to the sun. All right, so let me show you one other example. We'll get a little bit more personal here, although if you're interested, I'll get more personal in the community discussion, but I'm interested in looking at your charts. This is my nativity, October 24th, 75, 7:39 p.m. in Boston, Massachusetts. That's a birth certificate time. I like 7:39:02 p.m. in some ephemerides, not because it's like some super nerdy advanced master astrologer rectification. I'd love to claim that. I just like that it gives me 9:36 Gemini rising rather than 9:35. It's what I had first learned in other ephemerides, and I love that number. Anyway, so to retrograde back to the teachings of last week, is my moon void, of course, or not? Well, moon is applying to sextile Chiron, so if you honor Chiron there, then no. If from a old school point of view, no either. From the modern point of view, if we're only using Ptolemaic or traditional aspects with the visible planets, then the moon is void because she's made her last connection from this particular sign as soon as she translated the light from a Gemini moon, Virgo Venus square, to a Gemini moon, Aries Jupiter sextile. If we allow the moon to carry the light across sign cusps, it's a moon carrying the light of that Jupiter sextile to a trine with the Scorpio sun, which happened very shortly before moon conjoined Mars in Cancer after my birth. Mars out of bounds in Cancer anyway speaks to some of my experiences, but let me just show you in the dispositor tree here we see 2 planets on top again, but not because they are in their own signs, rather because they are in each other's signs. And this is the first example in these charts that we've looked at today of a mutual reception. Okay, now let's start actually at the bottom of the tree. I didn't have enough space. So, because Mercury's getting a lot of rent, y'all, right? So we have Saturn in Leo paying rent to that Scorpio sun. Now, some say that even though Saturn's in exile in the sign of Leo because he's far from his Aquarius home, that in a way, even though this applying square from the sun can be harsh, and if you know the traditional term, Saturn's said to be overcoming the sun in the square too, that because this Saturn's in the sun's house, it kind of negates some of that pressure because the sun must receive Saturn. I mean, it's an interesting thing to study. We want astrology to be a way in, not a way out. And sometimes it's just like, oh, cool. Well, I got off of that hardship that I was taught about. But it's more interesting to explore, well, how does this show up for me? How's it shown up in my life, the people in my world, etc., right? I'm not going to talk about all that right now. I want to get to you. Okay, so Saturn's in the sun's place. Sun is in Scorpio, Mars's world. Jupiter's in Aries, Mars's other world, right? So Mars gets that rent from Jupiter in the sun, and he gets Saturn's rent from the sun too, if we use that metaphor. But he's got to pay it. He's in Cancer to the moon. The moon's in Gemini, so it goes to Mercury. But Mercury's in Libra, so it goes to Venus. But Venus is in Virgo. She gives it back to Mercury. She's just kind of handing it back. But please have it. But can they hand it to each other? Because they're in neighboring signs, so traditionally they're said to be in conjunct. However, most of the ancient astrologers and Vedic astrologers as well would suggest that planets in mutual reception, even when in conjunct, have a connection through that mutual reception. I imagine it's a term you've learned, but generally speaking, mutual reception means that planets are living in each other's signs, right? And so here is Mercury in Libra, Venus's world, Venus in Virgo, Mercury's world. And some would even suggest that this means, I'm going to speak whole sign houses first, that they are connecting the fourth. Virgo is the fourth sign of a Gemini map, and the fifth, Libra, the fifth sign. I do have a great passion, fifth, for the land, the fourth. If we look in this Placidus chart, they're connecting the fifth and the sixth. So to use some kind of modern images, maybe like, well, let's say family illness can get connected. But what it also about like the sacred work of creativity. So I'm a musician and I like to teach through arts and whatnot and make pretty slideshows, whatever. So, you know, a mutual reception, you can kind of consider like a foreign exchange program. You know, like, so one of you here, let's say, is in India and I've wanted to explore India, and for some strange reason you want to check out the States. And I come and I live in your house for a time and you live here. You know, and it's maybe like the phone line is dead because we can't even see one another. The cultures are very different and the time zone thing is too difficult to deal with. But again, in many of the traditional astrologers' point of view, mutual reception is one of the, to use a term from Jyotisha, a yoga that does not demand an aspect. Okay. All right, so we know how this thing works. Let's do a few, or let's say 2 live examples here for any courageous soul who wants to play. And know that if you do, that means that your chart goes up on the screen, and so does your dispositor tree. I'm going to bring you here on camera and share your mic to talk about this with you. I really didn't talk about mine, but that's cool. Nobody wants to hear about me. And know that it's being recorded, broadcast to YouTube. It will be there, etc. Okay, so I see a hand raised. Maybe that means you want to play, but I'm just going to these things that I see in the chat. And by the way, I'm seeing a lot of you, which is great. Because that means our community discussion, which will follow this, should be lively. Let me just share, because some people, again, got lost in space And if you're on my email list, you got both of these links sent to you this morning, but let me just change my share here and we'll go online to geminibrett.com. At the top of the events page, you will find this link that you've already clicked to register for the Zoom. If you're here on Zoom, I know some of you are watching live on YouTube right now. Well, if you're on YouTube and you want to join the community discussion that will follow shortly after this video ends, click here to join the community discussion afterwards link at geminibrett.com/events. That will open a different Zoom room, which is not a webinar, it's a meeting. Again, I'm going to move to a different platform where I don't have to have two different links for a webinar and then a meeting. But that's going to be like more of a membership thing. And if you want to know about that, please be on my mailing list. So just go to geminibrett.com and right on the homepage, you sign up there. By the way, if you are watching this on YouTube now, or if you choose to review this on YouTube later, please give the video a like. Yeah. Please share it with friends of like heart and mind who might be interested in exploring these starry subjects like you and I are. That really helps, you know. Leave a comment. That would be sweet. That fuels the spaceship. All right. Let me go to events. I want to say one more thing before we get into a live chart example. For those who've been following my weekly Wednesday transmissions, and I'm now committed to offering a Wednesday transmission, miércoles, Mercury's Day, every week at 11 a.m. Pacific. Well, this Wednesday coming up, the 13th of March, I will be on a plane. So I'm going to pre-schedule a transmission. If I can do it right, it will actually air as the previous ones have at my Instagram, Facebook, and my YouTube page at the same time. I will definitely set it up to show at YouTube. And I was going to kind of finish what I started last week, which I had hoped to start last week, some talk about time and the 36 decans, but the 24 hours in Egypt, which is really a confusing thing. But I really want to be able to do that with lots of slides and also some live video work of me outside working the sky that I can share with you. So that's probably going to be a class or maybe even a course. I decided actually, I'm currently creating a cosmology course for Daniel's Turning of the Ages Mystery School with him. We've been working my nights and his days in the Philippines. And I've been creating a bunch of backyard astronomy videos for his students so they can actually experience at least the camera seeing a real sky. So I created a video for that on that Moon Venus conjunction day yesterday that I'm going to set up as a video and then share that to the channels on the coming Wednesday transmission, the 13th. And I will be back here to do a live transmission on Wednesday, March 20th, which I will probably utilize to speak about equinox and maybe share some photos of how that looks in Washington, D.C. Okay. All right. So we have a few here. I'm going to go with one that started very early, Casey, who used a magic word. So Casey, if you would, please, you can send it directly to, well, you might as well just put it in the chat for everyone because we're going to put your chart on the screen anyway. Please put your birth data there in chat. So cool that you are recording these events, Casey says. Thanks for that. And Elise, I see your data there, but I also seeing you need to split. Well, if that's 11:30 a.m., we can do it. Heather, you wrote, I was on YouTube. Oh, you were on YouTube and you came here. It's like, that's a strange way to express a birth moment. Okay, Casey, let me put your stuff here. 3:20 p.m. on April 2nd. Happy birthday coming up. Sorry, I know this is bad TV. Let me just make sure I got that right. Okay, Casey, I'm going to set you up so you can come on to the screen here. It's going to take a second. Okay, you'll receive an invite to become a panelist. And then once you're there, there's one more button I have to push. There you are. Okay. Now make you a co-host. So please, if you would, Casey, share your camera and your microphone. We'll do a systems test, and then let me get, actually, instead of getting your chart on the screen, I'm going to copy your chart into this presentation document that's going to require a few button pushes. So bear with me for a sec, people. And Casey, in this case, I'm just going to show the visible planets.
Okay.
Though I know, again, the Uranus and Neptunes and all those beings matter very much.
I have Pluto in my first house, conjunct a bunch of stuff there, Jupiter, and yeah.
Yeah, and again, like, I'm not in any way trying to discount that. I think it's very important. I like to start dispositor tree work in a kind of a traditional point of view, but I like to update them as well. And we can do some of that in the community discussion following for folks who come. So everybody, hopefully you're doing this at home now, and you see a lot of rent heading over to Mars, right? Because we have the strong Aries devotion at the time of Casey's nativity, right? Mercury, Sun, Venus, Saturn, all residing there. So let me grab Mercury and the Sun and Venus and Saturn. Oops, we're going to bring them down here. All right, and Casey, where is Mars in your chart?
In my fourth.
And in what sign?
Sagittarius.
All right, so in Jupiter's place, right?
Yes.
So we have this situation of Mercury paying the rent to Mars, Mars paying the rent to Jupiter, and then Jupiter giving that rent to Mercury, yeah? Can I just ask you, have you explored, dispositor trees? And
I have not. This is the
idea?
first time. Yeah, it's exciting to me.
How long have you been after your astrological study?
Well, I mean, since I was really young, I've been off and on and very strongly in my 20s. And then I would say I've kind of read charts a lot on my own, and there's missing pieces that I'm kind of filling in now of techniques and things, but I've always gravitated towards astrology throughout my whole life.
Wow, awesome.
Yeah.
That's exciting when there's like a new way.
Yes.
Right. And I think it's really important, there might be a time when it's like, yeah, that doesn't really work for me, or not interested, or whatever, you know what I mean? But I try to, like, there's a lot of techniques where I'm like, no, but I try to like just put them on this part of the shelf where maybe I can go look at them later, All right, cool. Well, I'm glad to be able to introduce dispositor trees to you. I gotta say, and I didn't say this earlier, I don't use this so much in my personal practice. I'm intrigued by it more and more. I use dispositorship a lot, but I don't draw these trees with clients. I might start. I'm becoming more and more interested in.
I feel like this is something I'm going to do.
Right on. And I mean, at least it's like kind of a great practice.
Yeah.
To like play with the rules that we've learned, right? All right, so I'm just trying to draw this. So our final thing here, at least for the visible planets, it would get a lot more intricate if we bring in invisible planets, and especially if we get into like modern rulerships as well. Have you studied much classical astrology, Casey?
No, not entirely.
Yeah, so even some of this.
I mean, I use whole sign houses though.
Okay.
That's what you mean.
Well, that's a thing of some classical astrology. Most classical astrologers don't, which is
okay. So then maybe I don't understand.
Well, I wouldn't say that's not that you don't understand, but Hellenistic astrologers, almost all of the chart examples we get from there are whole sign houses, but not exclusively. And classical astrology also spans the medieval tradition, the Renaissance tradition, where whole sign houses have kind of been forgotten. I like to use both. In this case, for these planets, we really don't need, Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto because we don't see Aquarius, Pisces, or Scorpio beings anyway, right? They might be exchanging with one another. But
Yeah.
here we have the moon in Libra paying the rent to Venus in Aries, who, along with Sun, Saturn, and Mercury, pay that rent to Mars. But then Mars in Sagittarius sends it to Jupiter in Virgo, and Jupiter brings it back to Mercury. So let's just start with the moon. This idea of moon in Venus's sign, is that something that you've explored in your personal self-investigations?
Yes.
What comes through for you in that? Like, how has it demonstrated itself in your life? Or another question I'll just add to that is, how has it not shown up in ways that you might expect it should, or that it's supposed to, according to the books and whatnot?
Well, it makes me, when I started to think about it as being in Venus's sign, is when Jupiter interacted with my Venus and Saturn just recently, like last year.
Uh-huh.
And I started to get, I started looking at my own Venus and that relationship with Saturn, and it just kind of blew up a big story about the feminine dynamic for me. And so it made me start thinking about my own moon and kind of wondering like what was going on there. It's in my money house, and so I just want to say I seem to have a lot of emotional things come up around money.
Hmm.
um, and then relationships with others. I seem to give too much, and there's not usually a balance of getting back, and that could be money, that can be through my healing practice, there can be but I mean, I don't know, we could go into a lot of big things here,
And
but
so that doesn't only, what I'm hearing, include relationships with like intimate partners or whatever, people that you're offering healing for,
yeah.
money exchange, whatever. Okay,
And
cool.
some of it could be my own fault, like I don't ask enough. I just
Yeah,
I just give.
I don't think fault is the word we should go to there, but I hear you, I feel you, and
Right.
I also
Like I'm
appreciate.
not blaming others. It's
Yeah, let's just not blame you. But I
right, right,
appreciate
right.
your amazing like courage and honor and all the things in sharing this. It's super appreciated, right? Um, yeah, and maybe this technique can offer a little bit of a clue.
Yeah,
Okay, so like where I first did my training, and it sounds like this is kind of in your astrology as well, like Venus is an image for the sacred feminine. She speaks for relationship. The way that I was first taught to me is like Venus is our inner feminine, Mars is our inner masculine, that women to know their feminine and project their masculine, and the opposite for men. And then for me, like just in my own path, that got really challenged when I was living up in Seattle and community started getting into all sorts of interesting open relationship dynamics and gender dynamics. And I was like, how do I, and then I kind of like just reverted to kind of an older school image, right? So let's do that a little bit together. And please know that I don't want to try to tell you who you are. But if we investigate this with this new image, maybe it works and maybe it doesn't, right? So Venus and Aries, again, you share that with Bob Marley. And we can certainly say that Bob Marley's Venus was working just well, right? He's an amazing artist, beautiful singer, beautiful man, had all sorts of relationship dynamics. I would say it was pretty counterculture, which is something that I think of with Venus and Aries. Your Venus and Aries also retrograde, as you know. A nice piece of that is that she's separating away from Saturn,
yeah,
but she's diving into the light of the sun. And it's
yeah,
a very different topic. But if you and I do a session sometime, I will tell you about how retrograde Venus is evening star like this. She ends up belonging to many Venus cycles, and it's one of the coolest things ever, and it's massively transformational. And it's just kind of like what I would share in that regard adds tons of, oh yeah, eighth house, right? Like there's so much transformation in your soul's devotion and the way that I kind of hear your song. That's kind of like the first thing that jumps out to me. And there's kind of this courage, you know? If we go traditional, interestingly, the relationship dynamic would be much more explored through looking at the relationship of Mercury and Jupiter. Right. And that, of course, as you know, I see you nodding, is because Mercury is said to rule your first and Jupiter your seventh. Right. I mean, I think one of the most important differences between classical and modern astrology is that the modern view, each of these planets is a part of us, which I love and I use. And in the traditional point of view, it's more like, no, you are Mercury because Virgo is rising. You're a child of Mercury. Your rudder is Virgo. Mercury is your steersman.
I was also born on a Wednesday.
Right on. Yeah, and well, okay. Anyway, some, by the way, because Mercury's in a quote unquote bad house, meaning the houses that can't see the ascendant, the eighth is in conjunct the first, would shop around for a kind of surrogate leader of the chart. And one practice was to go to the triplicity lord of the earth signs, who by day is Venus, but she's in the eighth too. So you kind of keep shopping around in many ways to pet the cosmic cat. And that's not meant to be this about this right now. For me, when I look at this Mercury, he's kind of devoted to the eighth, courageously Aries, going behind the sun. He has this cool trine with Mars, which actually he will perfect before he conjoins the sun, because the sun moves too, you know, and faster than Mars does. That there's just kind of this awesome courage to go do like Sagittarius Aries, innovative, like spiritual journey. And like, I love that astrology has been part of your go, because it's also very eighth, like occult, right?
Yeah.
And they'll burn us at the stake for this thing if we live not too long ago, and who knows.
Right.
So there's something in that mix, right? Venus, actually, interestingly, from a traditional point of view, because she's the guide of the ninth, right? Taurus being the ninth sign of the Virgo design. Her retrograde in the eighth might say that your like religion ninth, or your study ninth, or your teaching ninth, or like the draw towards your pilgrimage ninth is going to be old. That's how I like retrograde.
Yeah.
Transformational occult shit. and I love the Aries because I'm going to do it regardless of what you people say, you know. But it's like, it's going to transform you, like your study's going to transform you, and there's this courage to go do it and do it your own way, which I really also love and appreciate your chart. You know, that's not Libra moon stuff.
Yeah.
But one thing I love about your Libra moon is you're born during full moon. So we get that true balance of the Libra Aries axis. Like, we teach Libra's relationship. That's nonsense. It's one side of relationship. And this is like an important reminder for you for something you had shared before about feeling kind of out of balance in relationship at times. Libra's othership. Aries is selfness. Yeah. Not selfish like we're trained to believe, but selfness. And we need to balance othership and selfness to walk the path of right relationship. Yes?
Yeah.
And so I love that your Mercury's in Aries, because in a sense, to like really do this Virgo thing, I work with the ascendant like evolutionary astrology works with the North Node. I was taught that by my first teacher, Daniel Jamario, then at the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. I see it in the language of Hellenistic astrology, where the ascendant's called your horoscope and also called your rudder, you know. Right. There's something about the transformations of the eighth in Aries, right? So the transformation of coming into the power of selfness, despite the habits, the wisdom, the lineage of the Libra moon, who feels so opposite to Aries. Yeah. Right? Where like that's going to be where you truly find balance. And it's interesting to know that part of the way that the imbalance that you've experienced has displayed is in financial matters. The eighth being other people's money, the second being my own, to use those terms. But you know, an interesting thing also to observe here is that in the Virgo map, Venus is the guide of both the ninth and the second. And so, in a sense, I mean, think about Virgo, which, priestess, I think, is a wonderful name. The sacred, right? I mean, sadly, like the tradition, like the patriarchal traditions took that priestess and put the nun's habit on them and made them celibate and all these things. And it's not meant to be that. Like, that's not what virgin means. And I'm sure you're well aware of that, that virgin means unmarried. And there's a beautiful independence, or I even say undependence, in the Virgo design.
Mm,
So this is like such a story in your chart. And it's so, in a way, kind of contrary to Libra,
mm.
which I think of as this great medicine that she came in. But I also want to honor that the Libra moon, in places at the birth moment where she could be seen, is reflecting Aries light.
Mm.
And I personally, like, I've learned to see the moon and the sun as two parts of one thing. So that's kind of a longer story and for another time as well.
I
But
just
there really is,
part of
I'm
what you
sorry,
were
go ahead.
part of what you were just saying about it made me think of that I have Vesta in the ninth house.
Right on. Yeah,
I
that's
just
like
wanted to
another
mention.
thing that I'm seeing here. So I was just saying, a Virgo map in general, we can take all the planets away, and the ninth and the second are connected through Venus. So there's something really like, I value my spiritual quest. There's,
Yeah,
for some people, that's going to be like, my values are all about my PhDs or the law. Like the ninth is many things.
yeah,
But I love in the Virgo map, there's something about like who I am, who I know myself to be. It's all about my quote unquote religion, right? A weird word, but I'll use it and you seem to be.
spirituality for
Yeah,
sure.
right.
Yeah,
And that your religion and what you value is going to be some kind of occult thing. And there's also something about exploring what it is to be in exile in regards to like money matters. And even who's the ruler of the eighth, it's like Mars and Sag, right? And so even that kind of whole spiritual trip, like, I'm an astrologer. I really appreciate equal energy exchange. And I know you've heard this too, right? That like there will always be equal energy exchange. So if we're not receiving trade and money can help with that, then we're just taking people's demons on when we do healing work, and you don't want to do that. Like, that's all great philosophically, but we're also like, we're here to heal, to help, and it's hard to ask for money in that regard, and et
yeah,
cetera, et cetera. Sometimes we're shamed for it, whether
yeah,
publicly or not, or shame ourselves for it and all that stuff. Like, this seems to be such a dynamic in your nativity.
yeah.
But taking it further, it's like Jupiter in Sagittarius, right, who represents the seventh,
Mm.
right? Um, but this maybe offers this cool clue, right? So your Mercury and Jupiter, who are in conjunct, right? I just wanted to see if they're parallel, and they were when you were born. I don't know if you've studied parallels or not, but
No.
Aries and Virgo, they are signs of Antiscia or Antischia, which means that when the sun travels through them, he casts the same length of shadow and takes the same path.
Ah,
And the Antischia of 2937 Virgo, they'll always add to 30. So what we call the Anticion of this degree is 23 Aries, where your Mercury is not. But because the planets are not tied to the path of the sun, your Mercury and Jupiter actually are quite parallel, which is this little glyph right here, within a third of a degree. This means that they have what's called the same declination, and that they literally, though not at the same time, travel the same path through the sky on the day of your birth. And it offers a connection between Mercury and Jupiter that aspect theory does not. Because though they're so close to an opposition, I think that line's even drawn in here. They're on opposite sides of a sign cusp. So depending on how you do that thing, they're either opposite or they're in conjunct, right?
well, and I have a question because you don't have a couple things, which I just want to quickly ask. I have my South Node at 0, Virgo. I'm sorry, Libra. So
Uh-huh.
it's conjunct Jupiter right there. And I also have Uranus at 1, Libra. So they're all tightly packed right there
Yeah.
with Jupiter. So would that mean that it's parallel with Mercury?
Yeah, totally. That doesn't care about where anyone else is. They're the same distance from the equator. They travel the same
Oh,
path through the sky. For folks who want to dive deep into that, by the way, and thanks to Carolyn, who's helping me out a lot lately, there is now at GeminiBrett.com. Let me just show this. Da, 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 da. On the courses page, there are a couple classes that I taught last year or courses that were just added. And one of them is this fixed stars class where I teach projections, parans, and parallels. And they're awesome with a lot of great astronomical animations and study groups and other things. So, and then another one is this fractal timing techniques about progressions, directions, profections, circumambulations, and a bunch of other things. So check those out if you'd like. I'm going to just say while I'm here too, say again that I'm offering an 18% discount on all like astro sessions until the solar eclipse on April 8th. So if you want to take advantage of that, click any of these things and then at checkout, type in shadow play. One word, shadow play. I recently found that actually that doesn't work for this mentorship package, but if you book the mentorship package, we'll connect online and I'll offer you that 18%. Return. Okay, and Casey, that was also me trying to be an example for you of like, it's okay to market and to ask for economic exchange and that. And I know you know this, but I thought I'd be cute, you know? I remember being at a healing retreat at one point, and I was looking at a woman's chart there, and she was really upset that like the principal healer was not giving her the attention that she felt she needed and deserved. And she was like, he knows that my dad was missing when I was young, and now he's doing the same thing. And I was like, yeah, get it? Right. So, I mean, I think really that kind of healing through weird examples is always a good thing. Anyway, so maybe the Dispositor tree offers a new solution to try, or that you have, or a reflection of something that you do to bring the balance a little bit more. No, I would say this would be especially in like partnership, not only intimate partnership, but we say, quote unquote, anyone you get in bed with. It's less of a thing when we look to like friendships or your clients and other, right? Because that would be 11th house, kind of 10th house. It depends. Like, you know, when I'm sitting with somebody and have the honor of kind of tuning into their chart with them, I want to open that as a first seventh house thing. And I imagine that's how you feel when people are on the massage table or whatever it is that you do. So this still can apply, but right, like what we see is Mercury and Jupiter. And by the way, their mutual reception or their parallel will help with this. So I'm so glad I got to talk to you about that. There's something in the promise of them like following one another through the sky in the same path, and therefore offering a connection of Aries and Virgo. But in the Dispositor tree, we get to see this cool thing. That like whether we say the moon's in the second or Venus is the guide of the second, with Libra on the cusp, there's something about the moon feeding Venus and Venus feeding Mars, who so many of these cats do. And then he's in a way like between Mercury and Jupiter in this great like triple Dispositor branch thing at the top of the tree, right? And so maybe a way to balance some of the relationship happenings, and including in like Mars, Aries, 8th house, other people's money, Venus, Libra, 2nd house, like my money. I mean, the most important thing there, especially in the Virgo rising path, my values, right? And so that can sometimes contradict, right? Like our opportunity to eat, right? Because here we are in this world that demands that we make money and stuff, and it's tricky. But regardless, like look at how the moon feeds Venus, feeds Mars, everyone's feeding Mars, and he's in between this Mercury, Jupiter, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, like endless loop of your Dispositor tree. So there's something about like working with the power of Sagittarius Mars.
And as you probably know, I had a son who is a Sagittarius.
Oh, fascinating, right? Which so that can help for sure, like inspire you of how to do this thing. Like even like, you know, like, oh, what do I want to teach him about spirituality? All that, right? Like invokes questions here. But Mars rules the 3rd, Scorpio, right? And then also the 8th. So interesting, in the Virgo path, there's something about the occult voice or the occult skills that comes into it. It can be other things like abusive siblings and yada, yada, yada. But like this one, I think if you go to your Mars in Sagittarius, and some of that can be a willingness to like walk the way of spiritual truth.
Mm.
Hopefully that combined with the gnosis that there will always be equal energy exchange.
That was a pretty good summary of me, the walking the spiritual truth. Yeah,
Right.
very
And so
strong.
then a piece of that becomes is there spiritual truth to this idea of equal energy exchange? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where if I'm not receiving, like, so I always tell my astrology students this, like, when you're first starting out and you're serving people by looking at their chart with them, like, confirmation that what you're doing works is an amazing exchange. But at some point, it's not enough. And you start feeling, instead of like ecstatic after a jam with your friend, you feel drained. It's like
Mhm.
that's when you need to start asking for a trade.
Yeah.
Right. And whether it's sliding scale or you rub my back and I read your chart or whatever it is, or you cook a meal and we do this transit thing, like it needs to come in. And if
Yeah.
that's something that's true to your religion, right? At least especially in regards to economy, like communicating that or like really knowing that, developing that skill, will be part of like where this thing all finds balance.
Yeah.
Perhaps. Yeah. Thank you so much for playing.
Thank you. I really
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Right on.
Yeah.
It's nice to connect, and I hope to see you in the study group, which we're heading to next. Again, an hour late of as it is. I just shouldn't even think I can do these things in a decent amount of time. And you know what? For that reason, folks, let's go over there where we can communicate with each other and look at charts together and the like. We'll do things like this, but they won't be televised. They won't be recorded because we really want to have kind of sacred space. So I'm going to shut this webinar down. It's now where I stand or sit 11:08 a.m. Let's reconnect 15 minutes after the hour. And again, to get there, just go to geminibrett.com/events. I guess, for what we were just discussing, I'll just say again, I'm currently offering an 18% discount on all my stuff until April 8th. So click any of these things and type in shadow play, one word, when you're asked for a coupon code at checkout. You don't have to schedule before April 8th. You just book it before April 8th. All right. Here at the courses page, there's some new courses to check out. Please do. And at the events page, you will find right here at the top, won't be there for long because we're about to use it. This click here to join the community discussion afterwards. That afterwards will now be in 6 minutes. So see ya 15 minutes after the hour. Or you know what? Let's do it 20 minutes after the hour. I'm reminded that I should check in with my beautiful partner and our baby that she's carrying. So let's go 20 minutes after the hour. Click there to join the community discussion where we'll all be able to share our cameras and our mics and connect and explore dispositor trees together. Casey, thanks again to you. Thanks everyone that's here in present time and at a time that I perceive to be the future. If you're watching this later on YouTube, again, I encourage you to please give the video a like if you like it, share it around. It can really help my work and it's very much appreciated. And please subscribe to the channel so you will be notified at live jams like this. And just everyone know, like I'm for the first time in my life, well, at least in this side of my work, I'm committing to regularly scheduled transmissions, which are Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific time. So hope to see you at those too. And we'll do more of these free jams down the road, but I'm also going to start a membership group. And so more on that later. Please be on my mailing list at geminibrett.com to learn more about that. All right. So 10 minutes from now, 20 minutes after the hour, head to geminibrett.com/events. Click that Zoom webinar link. It'll be open and available now if anyone wants to get there before I'm there, but I will see you there in 10 minutes. All right. Looking forward to the exchange.